Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 425. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com. We're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and award-winning children's book author and illustrator, Jimmy Vee.
Well,
Jimmy.
I thank you for having me.
Yes. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm actually really excited to be on the show. I mean, I love the background. I love looking at someone with books in the background.
Yes. The magic of a green screen. See, that's what it is, Jimmy. See, that's what it is.
Well, you got me. It makes me happy to see books.
And and before we started recording, though, we were talking, and Jimmy's got an amazing setup. Like this is, sometimes we'll have guests on that are just talking off of like their smartphones. Some of them might out of a webcam, but Jimmy, you got all the bells and whistles right there with that mic.
Thanks. Yeah, the mic makes me look important. So, well, we were talking before the show, you're the guy with the radio station. You gotta have a good mic if you're gonna be doing audio, right? So that's what I got. Got a good mic.
All right, so we'll jump right into it then, Jimmy, because you have an amazing collection of books that you've done. What first inspired you to write children's books and with that and create such unique characters for your books?
Wow. So it's a weird story. I started writing business books. So I wrote a marketing book and then an industry related book and then a sales parable book with my business partner. And so, I've always been a writer. I'm a copywriter by trade, an advertising copywriter. I have an advertising company. And I was like, one day I was doing my goals and writing all my goals out for the year. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write a children's book. And I've always just kind of wanted to write a children's book, but never really put any real work into it or thought into it. So I just put it on the goal sheet, and one day I was sitting by my pool here in Florida. You can do that, and an idea for some lines popped into my head, and I started to write it down. And the whole genesis came from when I was in my business. I would be doing these talks for business owners, and in the talks I would talk about how I'm 5 feet tall. That's kind of my thing. They call me the 5 foot high marketing guy. And, and I would tell them that, I'm 5 feet tall and, I've learned how to turn that into a valuable thing for my personal brand and my business. And I've made a lot of money off of it. And, by embracing what was unique and different about me, something that people would think is, a negative, right? And they try to hide or shy away from the things that they don't like about themselves. And so I would get people to come up, adults coming up to me afterwards and saying, man, I wish I had heard this talk when I was a kid, because if I had, I would think about myself differently. And I was like, wow, that's really impactful. Thank you for telling me that. And then then I said, well, I can't go back obviously in time and tell them this story. But what if I wrote a kid's book that told them kids this, like essentially the same message? So that was the core idea behind my first book. I wrote Little Jimmy Says the Same as Lame, which is right here, this one right here. And I wrote the book. I had a mentor book. I like to call it a mentor book, a book that I read to my kids that I really liked. It was a book by Weird Al Yankovic. And I modeled that book. I modeled the size. I modeled the way he put it together. And I mean, obviously the book is not the same at all, but just the way it looked, felt, was constructed, the page layouts, and because I knew nothing about how to do a kid's book. So I just followed this book as my model. And I did the book, launched the book, and really I had no intent of selling it to the general public. I was launching a foundation, and I wanted to sell it to my clients and fund the foundation through book sales and things like that. And I did. That all went down. But once I did it, I know people think authors can relate to this. Once I did it, I was like, man, I really liked that. That was cool. That was fun. I want to do more of it. Right. So then I started to figure out, how do I learn how to do this for real, quote unquote. And so I started reading books on writing books, kids books. I joined SCBWI. I started attending conferences. I started doing critiques, writing more manuscripts, getting critiques, getting feedback, created a critique group, all of the stuff that you're supposed to do when you are in this, in the kids book space. And I learned a lot. And the big thing I learned was I did everything wrong on the first book. And, they say you shouldn't be too messagey. My book was messagey. There was all these rules, I guess. And I didn't know any of them. So I made some mistakes. And, but here's what happened. This is there was a positive side, which is I learned a lot and I did a lot of stuff. But the negative side was I didn't publish another book because I was waiting for my book to be perfect, or to find some magical agent or, editor that wanted that thought my stuff was so wonderful that they were going to pick it up. But at the same time, I was scared to submit, a ton of manuscripts, because I was told that, you don't want to just submit, you want to submit to the right editor or agent. You want to make sure your material matches what they're looking for. And I just couldn't find anybody, frankly, that was a match for the stuff that I wrote, weird, funny stuff. Especially today, I'm like a white dude with funny books with no, point of view, that are just fun to read for kids. So I didn't do anything. So 15 years goes by, essentially. And then I was, I'm also a magician and a ventriloquist, and I do kid shows and stuff. And I became the executive director of the International Ventriloquist Convention, which is the only convention in the world dedicated to the art of ventriloquism. And we were fundraising to build a new facility for the Ventriloquism Museum, which happens to be located in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, the Mecca. Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. It's not really a Mecca of anything, but there happens to be the only ventriloquism museum in the world is there. And so they were building a new facility, and we were raising money. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write a kid's book on ventriloquism to help the museum raise money for the facility. And there are no kids' books on ventriloquism. They're all very, kind of adult focused teaching books, and they're not very inviting, and it's a weird art to learn. And so I figured there was a hole in the market. So I had a friend that I met when I did my first book, who was an independent author at the time, but had since, in the 15 years since, had gotten signed with Scholastic and Random House, and he was an ex-Disney animator, and he wrote the Third Grade Mermaid series. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a Scholastic series. Peter Raimundo. And I said, hey, I got this idea for a ventriloquism book. You want to do it with me? And he said, sure. And so we ended up making my second book, which was a long awaited, as they might say, How to Make Your Sock Talk, a beginner's guide to ventriloquism. That's that. So I did that. And again, I really didn't have any intention of making that a mass market book. It was really to raise money for the museum and sell to the ventriloquist community, which like I said, I'm a part of, and whatever. But when I did that book, it rekindled that little desire, that spark. And so as I'm trying to, I think anybody who writes a book, the next thing is you got to figure out how to sell it, right? So I started to join these Facebook groups to kind of network, maybe get people to buy my book in these groups, maybe to learn something about marketing. And I stumbled upon one of these Facebook groups that was for independent authors who wanted to market and sell their books. And I started reading some of the posts, and I was like, oh, there's some good information in here. And as a marketer, I like marketing information. And some of these people were selling a lot of kids' books. And I was like, wow, that's surprising, because I wasn't sure you could actually sell any of these, in a mass way. And so I started learning some stuff. I went to an event that they were putting on. I met a whole bunch of people, got re-inspired, reinvigorated. I was so inspired at the event. I wrote manuscripts in my hotel room between the days of the event. And I wrote them. I pulled old stuff out of my computer that had been in there for years, polishing them up, got connected to a new editor that I essentially met through connections, and started to really put an effort on working on my books. And the reason I think that really pushed me was one of the ways in which the formula works to sell a lot of books is that you have to have books to sell. Imagine that. You have to have a catalog of books, because if you try to sell one book, you're not going to make much money, because there's only one book. So you need multiple books. You need like a back catalog of books. So I started saying, okay, I'm going to make books. So, and that was maybe 2.5 years ago. That was 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So from the first event, which was right after Sock Talk came out, a year later, from that event till the next year, I worked on Professor Nincompoop, and that is the book that was just released in December of last year. So this is the first time I can say I wrote this book for a mass audience to sell it, right? There's no excuses. I did not write it for any other reason, was to make kids laugh and to sell it, and inspire children to want to read, because they have something that's inviting and funny and unique and silly. And they would read it and they'd want to read it again and again. And they would say, I like to read. And that's why I wrote this book. And I'm really happy with it. And now I have 7 or 8 additional titles in the works right now.
Wow. Okay.
I've been busy.
And so how do you decide on finding like illustrators for these as well?
Yeah, well, because I own an ad agency, I've worked with the creatives a lot. And so what I really try to do, what I've learned is that pairing a creative person with the right project is like the magic. If a creative person is working on something that really does not inspire them, a lot of times it falls flat, even if they're very talented. So my job was, as the project manager, essentially, was to find an illustrator that was perfectly matched with the concept of the book, my vision and concept for the book. So once I figured out what the concept and the vision was and had the manuscript, then I would go seeking out illustrators that I felt whose style and just the way they went about their work matched what I was trying to accomplish. And then I would reach out to them and talk to them about the vision and see if there was a match and if I could afford them, and all of the things that go into actually retaining someone to do work. And I think that it's a skill of mine to be able to find those people, inspire them to want to participate in the project, and find a good match. And you can see, like, Nincompoop, the artist I used, Bennett, he's amazing. This art has such a weird and whimsical feel to it. It's modern, but also kind of old school. And I thought it was a perfect fit for the project. I thought his he does some illustrations for another independent author named Izzy B. You may know him. And Izzy has a really kind of wacky sense of humor too. And they do school visits together dressed like pirates, and they're very animated. And so like I felt like that this was just a perfect fit for this book, which is, as you can see from the cover, is just got a lot of chaos going on. You know, it's and it's very silly in its plot. And he embraced it, and he did the work. And I think that the important thing for authors to understand is that, especially author only book creators, the illustrations are 50% of the job, right? And you're not supposed to write everything. You're supposed to leave that half the book, half the space for the illustrator to fill in with the art. And that's what makes a picture book so special, is when those things come together in a way that is in harmony, and the author isn't overwriting the illustrator, and the illustrator doesn't have to over illustrate to make up for the author's lack of storytelling. And when you can put those two things together perfectly in harmony, you get the right words and the right picture, and the illustrations add so much to the story. And that I tried to do that. I tried to leave a lot of space for my illustrators, try to find the right illustrator that is a match, and then give them all the latitude to create their vision, their version of my vision, on the page. Because I am the worst drawer there is. I cannot draw anything.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. How do you balance the educational aspects with the entertainment aspects of a children's book?
Yeah, that's a great question, Barney. That is it. First of all, for me, I go in with no expectation of education. I go in really to appeal to a child's sense of humor, perspective, right? Like, what is going to make kid want to read this book? How is it going to make them laugh? How is it going to make them feel? How do I want it to make them feel? Are they going to want to read? What's going to make them want to read it again? What's going to want to make them pick it out of the bookcase, like you have behind you when they have a bookcase of books and dad says, go pick a book. Why are they going to pick this? Right. Mm-hmm. That's really how I guess that's a marketer's mentality, go and find who the prospect is and figure out what they want and write to that. And then what always happens though, as I'm writing, I start to say, oh, okay, this is the story, but here's the really the underlying message, right? And then just ensure as I get to the end that message is clear enough for it to be there. But one of the key lessons I learned over the years from studying kids' books is that you want that message to be there, but not obvious. You don't want to have the book lecture the message, right? You want the book to deliver an entertaining story and the message to be between the lines.
How has your experience working in advertising helped you be a children's book author? Because both genres use as little words as possible to convey a message.
Yeah, I think that it has suited me to the picture book genre, because I am used to writing in short choppy, I guess you might want to call it, bits that are powerful. Every verb, every word matters in copy. And I believe it also in picture books. It's a lot of editing, write long, edit, and edit, which, I know it's hard for independent authors to edit their work because they love what they write. And, you want to put so much out there. But again, remembering that the illustrator should get 50% of the opportunity to tell the story. You have to edit, you have to chop, there's so much you can leave out because as an author, because the illustrator is going to come behind you and fill in those blanks. Now you have to be open to those. You have one vision of what those blanks may be, but the illustrator may have a different vision of what those blanks may be. And that's kind of the fun of it, to come together and see where it goes, where you're taking the story and where how they fill in the gaps. But yeah, I think that the advertising background helps in the chopping and the editing phase. It helps in the marketing, in the creation of a book with marketing in mind. Because I think if you really want to, I have a principle that I've written about in some author groups that I call the golden egg. If you want a book that's a golden egg, which is basically a book that sells itself, it needs to meet certain criteria. And most often we don't write for those criteria. We write for other reasons. But and I will say, when I wrote Nincompoop, I wasn't considering this golden egg formula, because this was one of the manuscripts I had pre-written. I loved it. I thought it was funny, and I wanted to see it in print. I wasn't thinking about it from a marketing perspective. The book that I have coming out, I have 2 books coming out in spring. One of them is completely built from the ground up from a marketing perspective, and the other one is another old story I had in the works that it's called PD Perfect Pants and the Silly Sock Puppet Problem. And it's another sock puppet book. And so I wanted a fiction book that would go with my sock talk ventriloquism book, so I could sell them together as a unit. So I guess there's marketing thinking there, but I wanted to bring sock puppets and puppetry to a more of a mass audience. And so that's why I created that book. But it is missing some of the things that I think make a book a golden egg, which makes it sell much more in a larger capacity and easier to market and easier to make money with. But I wanted to make it because I wanted to promote this puppetry and sock puppets, and kind of, like I said, have those two go together.
Right.
And sometimes that's a loser. I mean, sometimes that ends up being a financial loser for yourself. And you just got, so this is a risky business, sometimes you make stuff and it doesn't do what you hope it will do. But again, going back to the reason I'm making books, if you have a back catalog and you have a golden egg, then the golden egg can drive the book sales of those other books that aren't necessarily golden eggs that you want to create. And they're great books, they're good books, but they're on their own, they're just not going to drive the marketing engine and sell themselves easily. And so you really need a golden egg to push the train. It's like the steam engine. And then you've got all the other cars or all the other books. If you have a couple of golden eggs, then you have more, you have more horsepower in your engine. And, sometimes you get lucky and you get a golden egg, or you can think about it build the book from the ground up. Still doesn't guarantee it's going to be a golden egg, but you have a better chance if you do it that way.
And talk to us a little bit about your school visits. How does that work for you?
I love school visits. I love performing. I'm a performer. I do, ventriloquism and magic shows. I have for years. I've done them at schools and at libraries and at birthday parties and fairs and everything you can imagine. So when I go to a school event, I look at it like a magic show. I bring magic and I bring my puppets and I put on a show. I don't think about it as just reading the book. I don't think about it as just an author visit, although I incorporate reading the book and, talking about being an author in the whole thing, in the whole program. But I really approach it from an entertainment standpoint. How do we create a program that's entertaining, that both delivers a learning message around being an author or making a book or creating, writing, things of that connect to being an author, and then secondarily, and then on top of that, um, deliver the funny, deliver the entertainment to make it worth watching. And I typically do programs for different ages. I break the ages up. And so in the younger groups, I would more likely to read the entire book to them. Where in the older groups, I don't read the entire book. I might read bits and pieces of it, show parts of it, talk about it, and they can read the book on their own, or the teacher can read the book to the class if they do story time after the fact. And I don't sit there and just read the book as the program.
The ventriloquism piece, it seems as though ventriloquism is having a comeback.
It is. It really is. We've had some big wins, I would say, for ventriloquism over the last probably 10 years, actually. We had Jeff Dunham came on the scene and honestly has emerged as one of the top, if not at certain points, the top grossing comedian of all time. We had Terry Fader won America's Got Talent as the first, ventriloquist to win the show. Got a big contract in Vegas, got a contract in Vegas from the show, then signed a second contract that was the largest in history of Vegas when he took over the Danny Gans Theater at the Mirage. Now, Terry Fader's talent is beyond ventriloquism. So we take credit for Terry, but he's amazing. He's an impersonator, a singing impersonator, ventriloquist, right? So it's hard enough to be a ventriloquist on your own because it's a compilation of skills. You have to be an actor, you have to be a comedian, you have to be a writer, you have to be a ventriloquist, do the ventriloquism, you have to be a puppeteer. So it's very hard to be a good ventriloquist. Couple that with being a great impersonator and a great singer and a singing impersonator. I don't even know how he does it. He's amazing. And so he deserves the largest contract in Vegas because he's just fantastic. We had Terry Fader. Then we had multiple. We had Paul Zerden won America's Got Talent. We've had multiple ventriloquists win Got Talent shows in other countries. Then we had Darcy Lynn, who was I think 12 at the time. She won America's Got Talent as a singing ventriloquist. And then we had Celia Munoz and Jack we're both finalists. I mean, so we've had a great run on Got Talent shows for ventriloquism, and it really has created a resurgence.
It's huge. I mean, I've always been a fan. I love old time radio stuff, so I've always been a fan of Edgar Bergen.
Sure.
And then you got in the 60s where you got Sherry Lewis. So, but then it was just kind of like a dry period. And now it's just, as you say, it just seems like it just popped up again. Like,
yeah, after Shari. I mean, and thanks goodness for Sherry Lewis. I mean, she had a lot of TV hits all the way through the, 80s and early 90s even. She'd come on with Lamb Chop and you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a little taste of ventriloquism in there. But yeah, you're right. After Bergen and Paul Winchell, do you remember Paul Winchell? And Danny O'Day and Jimmy Nelson, it really kind of just disappeared after that. And the Muppets, took the forefront of, I guess, puppetry on television. Not there's anything wrong with that. Muppets are fantastic. It's not ventriloquism, but it's fantastic. And Henson was a huge fan of Bergen. Bergen was an inspiration of Henson's. And, it just kind of kind of went off into the sunset a little bit. But
Yeah.
then Dunham brought it back, and then it's been riding high since. So
Right.
I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
It's such a unique art, and it really does. It's really it's a magical illusion when you see a ventriloquist doing the art. The puppet comes to life, and you lose the sense that this is a real that this is an inanimate object, and it seems like it's talking, and it's really a magical moment when that happens, and the puppet can get away with saying things that you just can't. So we can't say, we can't say.
Right. Well, so Jimmy, we're at our time, but you got to come back on. It looks like you're always coming out with books, so you should come back on. We can talk more and talk more again.
I would love to. I like I said, I have a couple books coming out in the spring, and one of them I'm hoping is a golden egg. We'll see, but I can come back on and we'll talk about it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thank you, Barney. I appreciate you having me again. Thank you, and thank you to everyone for listening, because the more we can talk about books, the more we can get books in kids' hands, the more we can get kids reading, the better off we're all going to be.
That's right. And so, but Jimmy, if people want to learn more about your stuff, they can go to bellylaughbooks.com.
That's right, bellylaughbooks.com.
Excellent. All right, perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, let me get the intro. I know we're going to talk about children's books now, Jimmy.
Awesome. Should I have my book up here? So like hold it up, or you got it all covered?
So if you want to hold up a book for our viewers, will like it, but then we'll describe the book if you want to, if anything specific.
Okay, I will have that in a minute.
Okay. All right. Let me get the intro in and we'll jump right in. Here we go.